There we go. So happy Tuesday to you all. We don't have a whole lot of new information for you this Tuesday, so this might be a shorter one. Uh, so we have a monthly BidBuy training that's scheduled for Wednesday, May 13th. We'll talk about that. Our weekly resource highlight this week will be vendor resources, because I know that agency personnel are really the have most touch points with vendors. So if they're looking for how to complete something, or where they can find additional information, we do have some vendor resources. So we'll walk you through that so you can share some links, that sort of thing. Just a reminder, I'll probably do this each week. FY fiscal year end is just right around the corner. Then we have our fun fact of the day, and then our BidBuy activity will be a small purchase with sole source conditions. We were going to do that a couple weeks ago, but I had some WebEx issues and we had to cut it short because I ended up getting kicked off quite a bit. So first off, our monthly BidBuy training. So in the past, as you may or may not know, we would have them in the CDB training room at the Stratton building in Springfield. And it would work out well because we would have computers there. We would walk through exercises, processes, all that sort of stuff. And we would kind of, move through different phases and different processes when we were done. So there wasn't a particular, one group maybe moving a particular quicker than others. So with us working remotely, we figured, hey, let's do something slightly a little more different and kind of advertise different times for certain things that we would be covering. So that way, if you are just want a refresher on something, or hey, maybe you have a particular procurement method, small purchase or release that you need to be working on this week, you can go in and just kind of check in and check out. It's different than having 12, 13 of us in one room where you're walking through, and then Derek and I as trainers can look over your shoulder and help you kind of walk through the processes. We're still going to be there to be able to do that. It's just that we'll probably have to do that offline. So for that BidBuy training, it will be done via WebEx. So of course, anybody is free to join us, jump in and jump out. I know everybody's busy, but this is the schedule that we're going to do our best to keep. In that 9 a.m., we're going to do the introduction, walk through a bunch of slides of, what BidBuy is, how it integrates with a bunch of other systems, general overview, and the general navigation of version 15, which is our new system our new version of BidBuy. Then at 10 a.m., we're going to walk through a small purchase under $10,000. Now that might take, it won't take the full hour from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. So then we might have a short little break. That way everyone's on the same page. At 11 a.m., we'll do a small purchase 10,000 and over. And then in between these times, you could potentially be working through those practice processes that we had just. So at 10 a.m., for instance, I will walk through how you do a small purchase under $10,000. Short little break. Everybody can go, try to work through one the way they normally would if we were in person, and then come back at 11, and then we do the next procurement method. Okay. Then we'll break for lunch. 1 p.m. we'll do a release off master. Now, if you notice, this is a little bit different than previously, just, even certainly from the logistics standpoint, but also in that it's starting at 9 a.m. instead of 10 a.m. So the reason we started at 10 a.m. in general was that a lot of people were traveling. So we wanted to bump that back to 10 a.m. so people that were traveling didn't have to leave quite so early in the morning to reach us in Springfield. So, but since we're doing remotely, it's going to be 9 a.m. I have to be off by 2 p.m. that particular day for another WebEx. So here's the link. I'll be sharing that link around. Also, next week, of course, this will be a part of the Training Tuesday as well, because that'll be May 12th. So just a day before, I'll remind everybody. Okay, here's your weekly fiscal year end is right around the corner reminder. And let's get into our weekly resource highlights. So as agency personnel, you do have more contact with vendors than, say, I would as an SPO. So, you have an opportunity to engage with vendors a little bit more, and a lot of times they're going to be asking you questions, and so you can, divert them or move them to some of our vendor resources. Okay, I am getting a note that, can anyone hear anything? No audio at my end. This is the first time I've heard that, and I've been talking for a while, so I'm guessing that Yeah, they have audio. Thank you. I appreciate everybody. Okay, so we have a pathway to procurement website, and let's just kind of walk through that real quick. So pathway to procurement website, there are several different links here. I'm not going to walk through every little thing here just on this call, but I make sure you guys know that this is a resource that's out there. I'll walk through a few different things. So in the procurement bulletins, as you know, that we have different portfolios. I'm training on the general services portfolio, but in general, just for your own edification to know, there are different procurement bulletins for Capital Development Board, for DOT, and higher education. So you can go in and look at BidBuy, for instance. Now there are some videos out here for vendors, how to register in BidBuy, the seller administrator role, how to register for IPG vendors only, as well as vendor seller manual and vendor seller administrator manual. So a lot of times vendors will ask those sorts of questions, especially if they're new to BidBuy. Where can they find information on how to update their account, instances like that, as well as vendor registration manual. So there's some resources there for your vendors. You go to the different CPO offices here. You have links to the Illinois Procurement Gateway. You have some links for the help desk, some links for emails, as well as some phone numbers for the help desks. As well as, inside of this pathway to procurement, we have a roadmap. I think this is very helpful. So, procurement can be a bit of a maze for vendors. There are some links here, rules of the road, that talks about, requirements for each one of your vendors. So we have standard procurement rules, some links to, procurement code, administrative rules, etc. Click on there, let's see that. That's just a link to the CPO's website. So there's some information there on vendors, for vendors. Let's go back to the procurement roadmap. The requirements to do business with the state. This is really helpful for vendors. All vendors who wish to bid on public contracts. It walks through, the Secretary of State guidelines and requirements with links to each entity. The State Board of Elections, it talks about that, has some contact information as well as links. Department of Human Rights as well talks about that. That is going to be changing. And that's something we'll be talking about shortly, is the business employs 15 or more. Now, that is going to be changing July 1 to having 1 employee or more, not 15. But that's something we'll be talking about over the next couple months. And then if you're doing construction for CDB or DOT, their pre-qualification. And then for higher education procurements, please contact the applicable public university purchasing officer for more information. And then procurement programs. Here we have, talks about the small business set-aside program, VBP, BEP program with contact information as well, state use. And then in the final steps portion is where, their actual bulletin would be, right? So, we live in, we used to live in the IPB world as well, and now we're in BidBuy, but other portfolios, CDB, DOT, and higher education, do have other procurement bulletins. So there are links for vendors to that. Registering for the IPG kind of just talks about what you need to be able to register there, and the link. And then some more information, reminders regarding political contributions and procurement communications. Okay, so and there are some more issues or some more links down here for vendor training specifically for BidBuy. You can always point them to these in terms of how you get registered, obtaining and responding to bids, bid opening awards, etc. Now we'll probably need to circle back, and because we were utilizing BidBuy version 13 at that time, we probably need to circle back and add some additional videos to that. Guides and manuals, statutes and reports. I don't think we need to get into all of that, but it is there if the vendor wants to do a deep dive. Okay. IPG has some other links in there. So it's just it's an all around, it's a good good starting point for a vendor. It's certainly if they have never done business with the state of Illinois, this is the step one to be able to say, hey, go look at these. These have all the requirements and all the links that you would need to do business with the state. Okay, so that was our weekly resource highlight for our vendor resources. Okay, so of course we know it is Cinco de Mayo, and when Taco Tuesday lands on Cinco de Mayo, it's a special thing. But I would be remiss to not highlight that it is National Teacher Appreciation Day, especially in these times, right? If you're like me and have multiple kids at home, and you are now the stay-at-home teacher as well, you are going to appreciate teachers more than ever. So Tuesday, National Teacher Appreciation Day, is the Tuesday of the first full week in May. A little history behind it. In 1953, Eleanor Roosevelt persuaded the 81st Congress to proclaim National Teachers Day. Now, it started initially in March, and then it ended up being moved a few years later by PTA Association to the Tuesday of the first full week in May. So I'm sure a lot of your schools are doing teacher appreciation stuff this week, but I also married a teacher, so I know firsthand what they go through, and we all love our teachers. So that's our fun fact for today. Also, everybody be safe, and happy Cinco de Mayo to you. Okay, so the BidBuy activity is not contract change order. I didn't change that. My apologies. Our BidBuy activity today is going to be a small purchase with sole source conditions. So if you're not interested in that, you don't hurt my feelings at all if you leave the meeting. But if you want to stick around, we're going to walk through in BidBuy how to do a small purchase with sole source conditions. It is very similar to how you would do a small purchase, only that there are a few things that are slightly different because you're not receiving quotes, right? You're not going to be, putting it out to all the small businesses first, and then getting a waiver, and then putting it out to all the businesses. So, and that makes sense, right? Because the whole idea is that you are, if it truly has sole source conditions, you don't need a waiver because there's no reason to have a waiver on a sole source condition. Sorry, that was my vendor account. Where'd it go? Okay, so there we are. We are in train, and so we are going to walk through that small purchase with sole source conditions. I'm really just going to walk through the job aid, and I do have a if it's ever going to come up. There we go. I have a requisition that's already ready for purchasing, so we're not gonna have to walk through the requisition. So nothing changes at the requisition at all. That is done the exact same way you normally would. And I'm just going to walk through the job aid here. And we don't have a special job aid for a small purchase with sole source conditions because it is run a very similar way, but we do have a few notes. So you're going to have to pay attention to the notes that are in our job aids that will say, if this is sole source, or if sole source conditions or emergency conditions exist, you'll do this thing, okay? So the requisition is exactly the same. I'm going to go in and convert this to a bid because in this case, the estimated cost is $60,000. So we have our requisition. I'm going to convert this to bid. Are you sure you want to convert this requisition to a bid? Yes, I am. And then now you'll see the summary has gone to bid, or our status has gone to bid, and I have a new bid hyperlink. I click on the bid hyperlink, and now I'm just going to walk through my job aid and then put in a couple of those different things that are specific to a small purchase with sole source conditions. Okay, so on our general tab, our description, our type code, I should say, is small purchase. bid available date, that would be most likely today. The bid opening date is still going to be the same. You still want to allow for approvals and generally a minimum 3 to 5 days for vendors to submit quotes. But since this is a small purchase with sole source conditions, you're not doing that for vendors to submit quotes. You're really just doing it to make sure there's enough time to get through the approval paths. Okay, so let's say I'll put it for Friday at 10 a.m. We're unchecking the allow electronic response, right? Because we do not want to receive anything. In the bulletin description, we need to enable rolling enrollment. We want to check that because what we want to be able to do, we want to be able to go in and put the quote, move this thing along, and not have to wait until that bid opening date. So just as a reminder, that's what that enable rolling enrollment does. So anytime that you have, renewal or anything that you need to get to the bid tab or the bid opening date. So if you're publicly posting anything, you would check this enable rolling enrollment. So there are a handful of procurement methods where you'll do that. In the bulletin description here, you're going to include that this is a small purchase with sole source conditions. Okay, you would have whatever else, what it is, right? Whatever the item information is, but then you want to include that this is a small purchase with sole source conditions. And what this does, it just makes it clear to anybody pulling this up that, yes, that's what this was. SPO name. Is it a small business set aside? That answer is going to be no if it's a sole source condition. BEP, since this is a small purchase, that answer will be no. And then we will move along to the next step. Save and continue. Now we can move. We shouldn't have to do anything to our items tab, right? Because that would have been done as a part of the requisition. The address, if you needed to change the address information, you can. For the accounting information, that was done already. But if anything changed, for instance, if it was previously they thought it was going to be less than $10,000, but you know what, it ended up being higher than 10, so that would change the accounting function. So if new items were added, you need to go back in, redo the accounting. Routing is not there. The attachments. Now the attachments, you have an internal. You'd have that procurement justification form, any sort of internal purchase request form. That's what I put in as a part of the requisition. Now we do need to have the small purchase with sole source conditions form, right? So if I go back here, I had this pulled up, there it is. So we talked about this last week as a part of our resource highlight, but this is all the information that an SPO is going to ask in order to approve a small purchase with sole source conditions. So this form, which is in our procurement resources library on the CPOGS website, you have this completed. Now there are no signatures for this, but it does need to be approved by the SPO. So that would need to be attached in there. And so we add our attachments the same way we normally do. We add file, choose file, and then we can go into, well, that has the, I don't think it's going to let me do that because it has the special character in there. So I'll grab something that doesn't have a special character because I've downloaded that. Let's see. Sole source conditions. You know what? We're just going to grab this. We're going to call that the small purchase of sole source conditions form. Looks like we have a question. Let me pull this up. I don't think there's been a CPO notice about this small purchase sole source form. On what authority is the requirement to include the form based? If you say job aids, I just want to be clear, are the BidBuy job aids now authoritative and policy setting? Seems like a big leap. there isn't a CPO notice, but really what it comes down to is those are the questions that an SPO need to have anyway in order to be able to approve. So, this comes from, feedback from agencies to be able to make these things move faster, and to have consistency from SPOs as well. So, in the past, if one SPO needed a Word document that had that information, or another SPO just needed an email, really this is coming from agency feedback so that the same information is being, used each time. I can get more, in the change. Yeah, I guess I'll have to follow up about the, authoritative and policy setting. I mean, that's in terms of, the processes that we need to do in order to move, to be able to move forms through and to be able to approve, then yes, that what we're saying, this is what needs to be done. We're certainly putting a lot more emphasis on the job aids so that it can be more efficient for agencies to use, and provide that consistency. Approving that form by the SPO seems to indicate that the SPO is making the determination that this is a sole source. In the change memo to the small purchase policy, seemed like the sole source was the agency's call. It is for less than 10,000. So if it's a small purchase less than 10, the agency fills out that form, and of course there's no waiver required anymore, and that is the agency's call. If it's greater than $10,000, that procurement method has to be approved by the SPO because it's greater than 10. And so absolutely the SPO would be the one that would make the approval that yes, this is a small purchase with sole source conditions versus just going out and putting it out for quotes. And that's always an option too. If there's a discrepancy between what an SPO or an agency may think if there's sole source conditions or not, if you go and test the market and put it out on the street, that's an easy way around that potential kind of roadblock. If unless I'm missing something here. Okay, so we have that attached. Sorry, I missed it. Just grab something here that doesn't have special characters. Okay, so, and that's not shown to vendor. Save and continue. And then we get to bidders. Now, if sole source conditions exist, you're only going to select the one vendor because we have already determined that this is a small purchase with sole source conditions, so we're not going to receive quotes. So we are going to look up and add the one vendor that we are going to contract with. We're saying we're going with Dave's Corporation. Save and exit. Okay, this is going to be restricted. And save and continue. And then at that point, we're not utilizing questions. There aren't any amendments yet. Q&A, reminders, you could, if you wanted to utilize the reminders tab, you can certainly do that. And then we get to the summary tab and we submit for approval. Okay, this would route through the approval paths per usual, goes to the agency's approval paths, it hits the SPO. The SPO says, yes, I agree with all the information. Yes, this is a sole source conditions do exist on this small purchase. And then the SPO says they provide their approval, and then it goes to ready to send status, and the SPO sends the bid. Okay, so we got confirmation that this was sent to the vendor. Okay, now what I can do, since the enable rolling enrollment was checked, I can immediately go in and open up the bid and add my quote, do the bid tab information. If I did not check that enable rolling enrollment, I would not be able to do the open the bid until that bid opening date. Okay, so now it's open. We'll go to bid tab. We're going to create the quote for our small purchase with sole source conditions vendor. Create the quote. Our vendor is in the drop down, Dave's Corporation. Received date. Could be any time. Save and continue. We'll go in and put our quote information on the items tab. I think we said this was $60,000. Let's go ahead and make the quote that. Question subcontractors we aren't using. I have the terms and conditions needs to be acknowledged per usual. Yes. Save and continue. Then we get to attachments. If there were any other attachments, in this case, most of the time you would already have those attachments already. But let's say, there's another, for whatever reason, there's another attachment, a specific, communications or, a quote or something like that. You could go in, add the same file the same way that you normally do. Add file, choose file, do this. I'll say this was, communications. There's a add something that doesn't have that. There we go. Any attachment that is for a quote in the training environment, for some reason, it doesn't mark them confidential because it wasn't freshed. But any document that's attached, whether any document that's attached to a quote, whether it's the vendor doing it or the state doing it on the vendor's behalf, will automatically be marked confidential. Let's see, we have another, is an SS form done in place of the PJF? It didn't look like you had a PJF attached. Let me go back. I think I did, but if I didn't, I should have. Because that PJF is it's not our document, it's a CMS document, and it's on at the rec that the CMS will approve. Whereas the small purchase with sole source conditions form is for the SPO because the SPO has to approve the procurement method. So summary, I will submit this quote and let me go back and see if I had attached the right document. Back to bid. I'm gonna go into my attachments of my bid and see what was there. Yeah, I see what you see. So I attached it, but I didn't have a procurement justification form. So if you go back to the rec, I added another document, which happened to be the small purchase with sole source conditions form, but in the description, I named it procurement justification form. So sorry if that confused anybody. I just didn't have a procurement justification form when I made this requisition. Okay, so now we've done our quote. We can go in and to award that quote or award the bid by going to the bid tab. And at this point, everything else is all exactly the same way that you normally would do. There's no difference. The big difference is that you are utilizing that small purchase with sole source conditions form, as well as, in the bidders, you're just selecting the one vendor and your enable rolling enrollment. Those are the three differences between what you would do with a normal small purchase. So in our bid tab, let's go ahead and award this vendor. Award. In the attachments of our bid tab, we have a few items here. We'd actually have to have our the forms A, forms B, depending on if they're an IPG or not, with the IPG info included. Where you download the PDF. The comptroller offset would need to be there. So I don't have all these actual documents, so we're going to call this the comptroller offset. And then we'll grab the same document and call it, this is the forms, A or B, depending on what that vendor, if they were an IPG or not. And just as a reminder, this is because since it's over $50,000, we have to have the disclosures, conflicts of interest, certifications, all that sort of stuff, which Forms A and Forms B takes care of, okay? And then any other communications that needed to be there. I do need to mark these confidential, and they're not show to vendor, which I'm just getting off of the job aid. Then we get to the summary tab, and then we submit the award for approval, which will route through the approval paths, and then you will create a PO per usual. Since we're in the training environment, you don't need to, or you'll have to automatically approve. You won't see that. It'll be routed to the next person in your approval path. And then now that it is approved, in a real world, right, I wouldn't be sitting here on the bid tab. So it'd be coming from the home screen. I get notification, yep, the award has been approved. I can go back in, most likely utilizing my recent documents. And then you go into the summary of the bid tab to create your purchase order. So I go to bid tab, summary of the bid tab, which is clear, it's on the job aid. It tells you exactly where you need to go. And then I will create PO. You want to include everything that's here. You have some options to uncheck these boxes, but just do not do that. All you have to do is select continue. And then now we will have a new purchase order, that small purchase with sole source conditions. And then at that point, the PO is done the exact same way as any other procurement method that you would have done, whether this has sole source conditions or not. There's nothing that changes at the purchase order. Okay. I do have an internal question here. Do we hide the bid holders list still? Yeah, in the training environment, that it's unchecked, but it's automatically checked in the production environment. That's why I didn't even bring attention to it, but that's a good catch. Fantastic. So do we have any other questions? So the big takeaway with the small, I said a little bit ago, but just kind of want to wrap this up. The big takeaway for a small purchase with sole source condition is from a higher level view, it's not to be confused with a sole source in that there's no hearing, there's not the sole source justification form isn't utilized, which doesn't have to be signed by the CPO. If it's less than the small purchase threshold, which is currently at 101,800, you can utilize this procurement method if it's proven that sole source conditions do exist. And so the big takeaway from sole source conditions exist for a small purchase versus a normal small purchase is you aren't sending it out to all the vendors because you've proven that this one vendor is the only one that can provide the good or service. So utilize that small purchase with sole source conditions form. You enable rolling enrollment because you want to be able to get right back in and move it through. And then the final piece is you are only, in the bidders tab, you're only adding the one vendor. We have another question. Do we do anything different if it's a small purchase with emergency conditions? It's a very, very similar. The only difference is, of course, you're not utilizing that small purchase with sole source conditions form. But from a BidBuy perspective, you are doing the same sort of thing. So you are enable rolling enrollment and you are only selecting the one vendor. So that's a great question. It is very similar, only that you aren't using that sole source conditions form. Okay, do we have any other questions? So per usual, this recording will be up later on today, and as well as the slides, and I'll send out the recording to everybody that was on the call. And of course, it'll be living in our training center, which is on the CPOGS website. Just as a reminder to where all our Training Tuesdays are, if you go to the CPOGS website, hit the training center here, and you have some BidBuy version 15 training videos or Training Tuesdays with the link to our WebEx each week, as well as all of the videos and slides going back to last September. All right, not seeing any other questions. We'll go ahead and end the call. All right, everybody, have a great rest of your day. Thanks for joining.